"Get this woman out of my house before I have her arrested for extortion." Grayson Blake's voice exploded through the mahogany-paneled study, every word cold and calculated, designed to obliterate the last fragile pieces of Elena Ruiz's heart. She stood frozen in the doorway, still wearing the champagne-colored silk nightgown, the one he had ripped from her hours ago in a fever of passion. In her trembling hand was a positive pregnancy test, now damning evidence of a foolish dream. In her most hopeful fantasies, she had pictured this moment differently. Grayson would be shocked, overwhelmed, and then gently take her into his arms and promise they'd raise the baby together. Instead, he looked at her like she'd just crawled out of a sewer. His perfect face, the strong jaw she used to trace at night, the storm-gray eyes that once seemed tender, was now twisted in absolute disgust. "Grayson, please just listen to me." Her voice cracked. "Listen to what? More lies?" he snapped, rising from behind his massive walnut desk. He stalked toward her like a predator. "You think you can trap me with this pathetic stunt? Do you even know who I am? I'm Grayson Blake, heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire. And you? You're a maid who makes beds." Elena's knees nearly gave way. 8 months of secret kisses, stolen touches, and whispered dreams shattered in a single breath. "The baby is yours. You know it is." "Mine?" He laughed, a harsh, hollow sound. "You were a distraction, a toy. Did you really think this meant anything?" She had seen glimpses of this cruelty before, when his father scoffed at her, when his friends smirked at their interactions, but he had always covered it up with kisses, with apologies. Now the mask was off. "We talked about a future," she began, but he cut her off. "You're delusional," he sneered, circling her in his pristine suit while she stood there, disheveled, vulnerable, pregnant. "There is no future, no baby. And if there were, which I highly doubt, who would believe you, a nameless, penniless girl accusing me of fathering her child? They'd think you're a gold digger chasing a payday." Her throat tightened. He pressed the intercom. "Security, escort her out." Tears blurred her vision, her hand clenched around the pregnancy test. As footsteps echoed in the hall, she turned to face him one last time. "I want you to remember this moment," she whispered. "How you looked at me, how you threw away the woman who loved you more than her own life." His reply, cold and merciless. "You were never anything." And as the guards led her out, Elena Ruiz, pregnant, humiliated, heartbroken, made a silent vow. "You'll regret this, Grayson Blake. One day, you'll understand exactly what you lost." She didn't know how far she walked after being thrown out of the Blake estate, only that every step felt like humiliation etched into her skin. The rain lashed down like a punishment, cold and relentless, as if every drop whispered Grayson's rejection over and over again. Elena didn't cry. There were no tears left. Only one thing remained, the tiny heartbeat inside her, fluttering weakly beneath the growing ache of hunger. 2 weeks later, she was living in the backseat of her beat-up Honda Civic, parked in a corner of a Walmart lot. The backseat was a cluttered mess of secondhand blankets, threadbare clothes, and one battered pillow. She had no money, no home, no one to call. Even the few acquaintances who once called her friend had vanished. Every night, she curled into a too-small Goodwill jacket, stomach growling, body trembling in the December cold. Whenever the baby stirred, she whispered softly, "Are you okay? I'm sorry. I'm trying." She'd applied everywhere, fast food joints, cleaning services, call centers, but the moment they saw her belly, the answer was always the same. "We're not hiring right now." Once, a manager didn't even bother to pretend. "You're a liability," he said. "No one's going to hire you." Elena swallowed the insult with the bitter taste of desperation. She still got up every morning, still looked for work, still refused to quit. Because of the baby, because of the vow she made to herself. For 3 straight days, she survived on stale crackers she'd found behind a gas station. Her pride had long since starved to death. She avoided looking at other mothers when they walked by with their children, not out of envy, but fear. Fear that her child would grow up in hunger, in loneliness, that one day they would ask, "Why didn't you try harder, Mama?" That night, the wind screamed against the glass of her car. Her phone buzzed, an old model, barely holding battery. A new message from a cleaning service she had begged for a job. "Thank you for your interest. The position has been filled." The 12th rejection that week. She placed the phone on the passenger seat and pulled her knees to her chest. Her head throbbed. Her belly ached. And then something stirred. Her eyes flew open. The baby had moved for the first time. A faint flutter, barely there, but real, alive, fighting. Polina placed both hands over her stomach, and for the first time in days, tears spilled down her cheeks. Not from shame, not from pain, but from something else, hope. There were nights, cold, hungry nights, when Elena reopened Grayson's old message, the one where he offered her $5,000 to take care of the problem. The clinic's phone number attached. Quick, discreet, I'll cover the cost, pretend none of it happened. She had saved the number, typed it in, deleted it, more than once. Not because she wanted to end the pregnancy, but because she was desperate. Every time her stomach growled from days without food, she asked herself, "Am I hurting the baby just by keeping it?" And if she truly loved this child, would the kindest act be letting it go? Sparing it from a life of poverty, of hunger, of suffering beside a broken, homeless woman with nothing to offer. Once, she stood outside the clinic. Her hand had touched the door handle. But then she saw a woman walking out, visibly pregnant, clutching her belly, eyes red and hollow. Elena froze. In that woman's exhausted steps, she saw herself. And then, the baby fluttered inside her. Just a nudge, barely there, but it was enough. No words, no arguments, just that tiny movement, a whisper of life, saying, "Don't give up on me." She turned away from the clinic, walked back to her car, crawled into the back seat and lay still. And for the first time, she whispered, "I choose you, no matter what. I choose you. Grayson thinks I'll stay broken, but I will rise for my child, and he will pay for what he did." That morning, the sky was a heavy slate gray, matching Elena's spirit. She forced herself out of the car, legs stiff and numb from another night of cold. One hand clutched her stomach, the other gripped the car door for balance. She only made it a few steps before the world tilted. Her vision blurred, her lungs refused to fill. The ground came fast. She didn't remember falling, just the sting of concrete against her cheek, the chatter of heels clicking on pavement, people passing, looking, but not stopping until a voice broke through. Deep, calm, commanding, "She's pregnant! Call an ambulance! Now!" Strong, careful hands lifted her. Elena's eyes fluttered open. A man in a black suit, dark navy eyes filled with concern. His arms didn't hesitate, didn't recoil from her soaked, disheveled frame. Dominic Vance, CEO of Vance Dynamics, had been on his way to a shareholder meeting when he saw her collapse in front of the Grand Meridian Hotel. His driver had urged him to keep moving, but Dominic had already stepped forward. When he looked at her pale face, he saw something that stopped time. Himself, at 14, hungry, trembling, invisible to the world. He didn't wait for an ambulance. "Bring her to the penthouse," he told his driver. "Get the medical suite ready." When Elena awoke, she was wrapped in warmth, soft lighting, a gentle scent of eucalyptus in the air. A nurse checked her vitals as soft piano music played in the background. She bolted upright. Panic. Where am I? The door opened. Dominic stepped in. The jacket was gone, his tie loosened. Calm eyes met hers. "You're safe," he said gently. "I'm Dominic Vance. I found you this morning. You were unconscious." She tried to rise. "I'll leave. I don't have money to pay for this." Dominic shook his head. "You owe me nothing. I didn't help you for repayment." She narrowed her eyes. "Why me?" He paused, looked at her, really looked. "Because I was you once." The silence that followed held more weight than anything he could have added. Something inside her cracked, just a little. So many had walked past her without a second glance, but this man, a stranger, had stopped, not to question, not to judge, just to see her. When Elena found out that Dominic had once been homeless for 3 years during his teenage years, her heart clenched. He, the man in expensive suits, living in one of the city's most luxurious penthouses, had once slept under bridges, gone 3 days without food, and been avoided like a plague. He didn't need to explain much. Elena understood, because in his eyes that day, when he lifted her from the pavement, there was something she hadn't seen in anyone else over the past few weeks. Empathy. Not pity, not performative sympathy, but the raw understanding of what it felt like to be invisible. When Dominic brought her to the penthouse, Elena thought he would change his mind halfway there. But he didn't. He took her up the private elevator, instructed his assistant to call a personal doctor, and told the nurse to bring clean clothes, warm blankets, and something light to eat. Lying on the pristine white bed, bathed in soft light, Elena was full of doubt. Everything felt too peaceful, too kind. She stared up at the high ceiling, her chest tightening. No one does this without wanting something in return. Elena sat quietly on the edge of the large, white-sheeted bed, soft sunlight filtering through sheer curtains and casting a pale glow across her weary face. The silence unnerved her. No car horns, no bitter wind biting at her skin, no insects buzzing near her ears as she lay curled in the back seat of a broken car. Peace. So unfamiliar, it felt wrong. She looked around the room. High ceilings, tasteful artwork on the walls, fresh flowers arranged neatly in a crystal vase. Everything whispered luxury, care, and gentleness. And yet, the man who owned all of this had lifted her, a homeless, dirty stranger, from the pavement, without hesitation. Elena was used to disgusted looks, to whispered judgments, to mothers yanking their children away if she stood too close. But Dominic's eyes had held something entirely different. Recognition. Not pity, not curiosity, but deep, wordless empathy. When the nurse left, Dominic stepped in, carrying a warm mug of tea. "You should eat something," he said gently. "I had my private physician check on you and the baby. Everything looks stable, but you need rest and nutrition." She accepted the tea with trembling hands. "You didn't have to do all this. I'm not used to being helped." Dominic sank into the armchair across from her, his posture calm, his voice steady. "I lived in a Brooklyn shelter when I was 14, he said. "Ate leftovers from behind a diner. I know what it's like when people look at you like you're invisible." Elena froze. Her throat tightened. "I thought someone like you never knew what it meant to go without," she whispered. He offered a faint smile. "We all have a past. I was lucky. Someone stopped for me once. They didn't ask questions, they just saw me." She didn't know how to respond. There was something in his tone, quiet, unforced, that unwrapped the fear she didn't know she was still holding. He hadn't asked why she was on the street. He hadn't judged her for being pregnant. He hadn't offered help with a price. He simply helped. And for the first time in a long time, Elena felt like maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be alive. 2 weeks later, Elena barely recognized the woman in the mirror. The wind-burned, hollow face was gone, replaced by soft skin, rested eyes, and sleek, freshly trimmed hair. Her gaze no longer flickered with fear. It held focus, determination. She was no longer the woman curled up in a parking lot. Dominic had given her more than shelter. He'd given her something no one else had. A chance. "Would you like to work?" he asked one afternoon while she was reading in the penthouse library. She looked up, startled. "Work?" "Not charity," he smiled. "I think you have a sharp mind. I need someone with instinct, someone who sees the world differently. I'll train you, if you're willing." Elena didn't know what to say. She had been turned away by fast food chains. Now a billionaire was offering to mentor her? She nodded. From that day, she threw herself into learning like her life depended on it. Dominic gave her books, business, psychology, market strategies. She devoured them, took notes, studied late into the night. She learned how to speak, how to walk, how to carry herself in a corporate room. Dominic wasn't soft. He was exacting, direct, demanding, but always fair. And Elena, once dismissed as just a maid, began to evolve. She joined internal meetings, at first as a silent observer. Then Dominic began asking her thoughts. She offered insights others missed. Real-world logic, perspective that only someone who had lived at the bottom could offer. The first time she presented a marketing strategy, the room fell silent. Then, a nod from the senior director, and Dominic smiled. She walked out of that room with her heart pounding. For the first time in her life, she didn't just survive, she was seen. Later, standing in front of the mirror, dressed in a sleek black blazer, tablet in hand, eyes steady and full of purpose, she whispered to herself, "I'm not going back. I'm not that girl anymore." And then, just when Elena had learned to stand on her own, when she was no longer a woman who needed saving, Dominic, the man who once pulled her from the shadows, surprised her again. Not with protection, but with a love that asked for nothing, expected nothing, and gave everything freely. Liam was born on a spring afternoon, warm, calm, and filled with golden light. When his first cry echoed through the room, Elena wept. Not from pain, but because for the first time, she felt like she'd been born again too. Dominic was there the entire time, never once letting go of her hand, not for a second. When the nurse placed Liam, tiny, trembling, and red-faced, into her arms, Dominic reached out and gently touched the baby's head, his eyes misting. He whispered. 3 days later, Elena sat in the sunlit conservatory of the penthouse, cradling Liam as warm rays danced across his soft hair. Dominic entered, dressed casually, no suit, no tie, no formality. He sat beside her, quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've finalized the paperwork to adopt Liam legally." Elena turned to him, stunned. You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said simply. "But I wanted to, for Liam, and for you." His gaze locked with hers. "I want to be his father. Not just on paper, in every way that matters." Elena was quiet. The breeze touched her cheek like a whisper. "I'm not perfect," she murmured. "I come with baggage. I come with a child that wasn't yours to begin with." Dominic smiled softly. "Blood doesn't make a father, Elena. Choice does. And I choose you. I choose your child. Not out of duty, out of love." From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box. Inside, a simple, elegant ring shimmered in the sunlight. "Elena Ruiz. Will you let me be the man who loves you for the rest of your life?" She looked at him, at Liam sleeping peacefully in her arms. Her eyes filled with tears. "I once believed no one could love someone like me," she choked. "But you made me believe I'm worth loving." She nodded, and in that moment, in the quiet garden above a city of noise, Elena was no longer the woman who had been cast aside, and she was the woman who was chosen. The news spread like wildfire. Dominic Vance, the powerful young CEO of Vance Dynamics, had officially announced his engagement to a mystery woman once believed to have lived on society's margins. Every major outlet, from financial journals to gossip blogs, ran the story. In a candid photo taken by paparazzi, Elena appeared radiant in an ivory dress, holding baby Liam. Dominic stood beside her, his hand gently resting on her back. The three of them, a picture-perfect family. Miles away, inside the glass tower of Blake Industries, Grayson Blake slammed a magazine onto his desk. He didn't care about Elena. He cared about the child. Those storm gray eyes, that familiar chin, the unmistakable resemblance. Grayson shot to his feet, blood roaring in his ears. "That's my son." Rage surged through him. Not because Elena had kept it a secret, but because his pride had been wounded. The girl he'd once tossed into the rain now stood beside one of the city's most powerful men, with his child in her arms. Grayson couldn't let it go. At a charity gala hosted by the Vance Foundation, Elena entered in a ruby velvet gown, her hair swept into an elegant bun. She no longer walked like a servant. She owned the room. Grayson cut through the crowd, reaching her side. "Hey, Elena." She turned, her eyes cold. "Well, you still remember my name." Said, "Boy, he's mine, isn't he?" She smiled. Not with innocence, not with pain, but with a calm, ruthless grace. "You gave him up before he even had a name, Grayson." His fists clenched. "You stole him from me." "Stole?" Elena stepped closer, her voice low and sharp. "No, I rescued him from you. I won't let my child grow up believing worth is measured by blood or privilege." She brushed past him, but before disappearing into the crowd, she said, without turning back, "You once looked at me like I was nothing. Now, I sit at tables you're not even invited to." Grayson stood frozen in the glittering ballroom, but the crystal lights and soft orchestras no longer reached him. Elena's words echoed through his mind like a dull blade slicing through pride. "I sit at tables you're not even invited to." He didn't see the proud, powerful woman she'd become. He saw his son, growing up in another man's arms. And the fury inside him didn't come from love. It came from a bruised ego. As reason slipped away and selfishness took hold, Grayson made his decision. If he couldn't have everything, he'd take back the one thing that carried his blood. That day, Elena dropped Liam off at his international preschool nestled inside a high-security, luxury complex. Guarded gates, surveillance cameras, private security. She thought he was safe. She thought no one could get near him. She was wrong. Grayson, dressed in a hoodie and dark glasses, blended into the crowd of parents during pickup hour. He flashed forged documents, claiming to be Liam's biological father with written consent from the mother. A distracted security guard let him through. While a teacher was occupied, Grayson swooped in, scooped Liam into his arms, and turned to leave. The boy screamed. That scream was the first red flag. Moments later, alarms echoed across the entire school grounds. Grayson ran, but he didn't get far, because waiting just outside the gates, parked calmly, was a sleek black SUV, and stepping out of it was Dominic Vance. There was no rage on Dominic's face, only deadly calm, the kind of silence powerful men wield when they're about to destroy something, permanently. "Put him down," Dominic said, voice like stone. Grayson yelled, "I'm his father." Dominic stepped closer, every movement deliberate. "Father? A father is the man who left a pregnant woman crying in the rain. The man who tried to buy his son's disappearance for $5,000? Grayson backed away, but it was too late. Security closed in. A guard yanked Liam from his grasp. The boy sobbed, clinging tightly to the only man he had ever called Dad, Dominic. Police sirens howled in the distance. Minutes later, Elena arrived, breathless and pale. Her heart nearly gave out until she saw Liam, safe, wrapped in Dominic's arms. She ran to them, embracing her son, trembling. Dominic held them both, firm, steady, unshakable. Grayson, handcuffed, was dragged toward a patrol car, red and blue lights flashing. Gail being shoved inside, he screamed, "You can't keep him from me forever. He's mine." Elena stared at him, her voice cold, her gaze sharper than steel. "You were never a father, and now you'll never get the chance to be one." Grayson was slammed against the hood of the patrol car, steel cuffs digging into his wrists, his face flushed red, not from guilt, but from rage and humiliation. Dominic stepped closer, eyes hard as forged iron. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word landed like a final nail in a coffin. "You just signed your own destruction with your bare hands." Grayson snarled, "She stole my son." Dominic said nothing, because this time the law would do the talking. The trial took place 2 weeks later. Grayson faced charges of child abduction backed by clear surveillance footage, testimonies from teachers, guards, and even a bruise on Liam's arm from the scuffle. He sat at the defendant's table, no arrogance left, just a hollow shell in a dark suit. Elena entered the courtroom in an ivory suit, holding Dominic's hand and carrying Liam on her hip. No one called her the Maid anymore. She was a mother, a businesswoman, a woman the court would now listen to. The judge slammed the gavel. Elena Ruiz is hereby granted full and sole custody of Liam. Elena closed her eyes as silent tears streamed down her cheeks. Not from triumph, but because now, finally, no one could take her son away again. When Elena walked out of that courtroom, she hadn't just won custody of her son. She'd reclaimed herself. The past had tried to bury her, but every courtroom battle, every tear, every sleepless, starving night had built the foundation of a new woman, one who no longer begged for a place in this world, but built one of her own. And the first step was returning to the place that once cast her out, to rule it. On a Monday morning outside the once feared Blake estate, the place where she was thrown into the cold rain, a convoy of moving trucks, contractors, and interior designers arrived, and stepping out of a sleek black Rolls-Royce was a woman in white, Elena Ruiz. Dominic had quietly and decisively purchased the entire Blake estate after the court proceedings. The price was never disclosed. All anyone knew was that Grayson lost the deed and the final signature on the transfer belonged to Elena. Elena Cinia, the mansion was transformed. Elegant furnishings, manicured gardens, and warm-toned walls replaced the cold, oppressive grays. It reflected not just money, but power and healing. 3 months later, the doors reopened. Elena, now Dominic's fiancée, Liam's mother, and a major shareholder in Vance Dynamics, returned to the place that once cast her out. Not to plead, but to own it. On the first day of reopening, a familiar face appeared at the gate. Evelyn Blake, Grayson's mother. The same woman who once called Elena trash, who shamed her for being an unwed mother, now stood wearing a faded blouse, clutching a job application. "I heard you were hiring a housekeeper," she said, voice unsteady. Elena watched from the second-floor window. A part of her wanted to turn away, to return the humiliation she once endured. But she wasn't that broken girl anymore. She descended the stairs. Their eyes met. "I remember what you said to me, Mrs. Blake." Elena's voice was calm but cold. Evelyn lowered her head. "I don't expect forgiveness. I only ask for honest work." Silence hung in the air. Then Elena nodded once. "Fine, but remember, those floors saw me beg once. Now they'll see you serve the woman you tried to break." Evelyn nodded, tears in her eyes, and Elena turned away, ascending the grand staircase of the Blake estate, no longer hiding, no longer small, because the girl once cast out had returned as the queen of it all. 18 months after the trial, Grayson was released for good behavior, but he was no longer the polished executive he once was, just a thinner, paler, lonelier man with nothing left. His company? Gone. His name? Disgraced. His family? Vanished. And most of all, his son. Lost before he even realized he wanted to keep him. One pale afternoon, Grayson stood outside the gates of the Vance estate. In his hand, a handwritten letter. In his eyes, defeat. He didn't dare enter, only waited, like a beggar hoping for mercy. Elena stepped out of a sleek car, wrapped in a long cream coat, holding Liam's small hand. She paused when she saw him. Just a minute," he stammered. I only want to see him, from a distance even." Elena didn't answer at first. She bent down to fix Liam's scarf, now a bright, confident boy full of life. Then she straightened, her voice cutting the air like frost. "You had your chance, Grayson, and you threw it away." Elena's voice was steady. "This isn't about hate. It's about safety. My son deserves better than someone who left him before he had a name." She took one step closer, and her words came slow and sharp, like a blade dipped in truth. "You lost the woman who would have moved mountains for you. Now stand there and watch another man raise your son like a prince." Grayson stood frozen. Something broke quietly inside him. Liam glanced at the strange man once. No recognition in his eyes. Then he gripped his mother's hand tighter and led her inside. And Lena didn't look back. The gate slammed shut behind them. A sharp click echoed, final and unforgiving. Grayson stayed still, the letter slipping from his hand, lost in the wind. And Elena, for the first time, didn't feel anger, she didn't feel sorrow, only a quiet release, because finally the old door had closed, and she would never need to open it again. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the red-tiled roof of the Blake estate. Once a symbol of aristocratic power, once the place that had cast her out with nothing but cold judgment, now it belonged to her. Elena stood on the second-floor balcony, her hand resting gently over her rounded belly. Twins, the quiet promise of a new chapter born from love, resilience, and unbreakable will. A soft breeze brushed her hair. Below, laughter rang out. Dominic chased Liam across the green lawn, the boy giggling uncontrollably, darting behind bushes and trees. His eyes sparkled with joy, eyes that knew no pain, no abandonment. Only one word for the man chasing him, Dad. Elena smiled. Not a smile born of defiance, not one that hid tears, but the smile of someone who had won. She had once wandered the streets in the rain, belly full and hands empty. She'd once been labeled trash, told her future ended at the gates of wealth and bloodline. But now, she didn't just survive. She ruled. She didn't need revenge, for no one held power over her anymore. She didn't need validation. Her presence was proof enough. The girl who had been thrown away had become the woman who owned everything. Elena leaned against the marble railing, eyes steady, voice silent, but soul thunderous. And to herself, with no bitterness, only conviction, she whispered, "I was once the one discarded, who am the empire you'll never touch, because I built it with every stone they threw at me. Not a vow, not a curse, just a truth carved from scars." Below, Dominic looked up and waved. Elena descended the stairs, her steps firm, her spirit free. Because her ending wasn't an ending at all. It was the beginning of a legacy.